Hey, what's going on, team? So, what does consuming alcohol, sewing, and insulin all have in common? So, let's talk about this. Some pretty good analogies here. So, think of a sewer. What a sewer does is they sew and they inevitably will prick their thumb many times. Okay, it's just kind of part of sewing. So growing up, my grandmother had sewer's thumb. So what happened is she became resistant to the pricks and developed a callus. So that was the body's response to the callus, where I didn't have sewer's thumb. So if you took a needle and pricked me, I was like, ow, that hurts. Where my grandma, she could do this all day long with a needle because she developed that tolerance. So we talk about bourbon. So if you've never had a bourbon before and you're over 21 and you sip on a bourbon, you're going to get like, woozy. There's going to be an immediate effect. However, if you were to drink 2 or 3 bourbons a day, or chronically we're drinking bourbons or any other alcohol, what happens is we develop a tolerance to that alcohol. So it makes very, very perfect sense in those realms. So for my grandma to be able to hurt herself, she would have to have a pretty big needle and go pretty deep underneath that callus for it to have an effect. For the person who is alcohol resistant or ethanol resistant, or has developed a resistance to the ethanol, they would have to drink a fair amount to get the same initial effects. So this is how it pertains into insulin resistance, which is a huge, huge issue. And everyone's kind of trying to figure out, like, man, why are there so many type 2 diabetes out there, or diabetics out there? Why are we so insulin resistant? Well, what has happened is we have increased our calories, particularly glucose or particularly carbohydrates, but our calories in general have gone up. So what happens is insulin goes and is released to transport that glucose into the cell, and your body will just like it does with alcohol, just like it did with the pinprick, it develops a resistance to that. Okay, so picture you have insulin kind of knocking out the door of the receptors, and the receptors are like, I just heard from you a minute ago, and then it's knocking again, I just heard from you. So it develops resistance, and it kind of shuts down some of those insulin receptors. Well, the glucose still is coming in. Okay, the glucose has to go somewhere. So what's the body do is it produces even more insulin. Okay, just like, again, you might have been able to feel an effect off 1 or 2 pricks initially sewing. Now it might take 100, okay? Or you might be able to feel an effect off 1 or 2 glasses of wine, where if you had an abundance of wine, picture if you had a bottle of wine every day, 1 or 2 glasses would be nothing. That's how, as a society, we're developing this insulin resistance. The quickest way to deal with that is we need to eat less, particularly less refined carbohydrates, sugars, high glycemic carbohydrates, but really just less in general. Okay, so it's not just necessarily a carbohydrate thing, it's an abundance of calories, and yes, a lot of those calories are coming from sugar. So that's kind of how these things are going on, and the biggest way that you can combat that is just to be aware. A lot of times, sugar or calories, they hide out in places that we had no idea that they were hiding out. So a good thing that we do at Macro Missionary is, when helping people to become more aware of the calories they're taking, we just have them take a picture of their foods, send it to us, and man, it's a total eye-opener. You would ask them, like, hey, how much calories do you think's in that? Oh, maybe a couple hundred, where sometimes it's upward to 1,000. Okay, so hopefully this helps you understand how insulin resistance works, and how, just like anything, we don't want to have to drink a fifth or a whole bottle of wine to have a relaxing evening. And it's the same thing that with insulin resistance, we don't want to be eating so many calories, so much sugar, so much carbohydrates that our body is not functioning appropriately. So hopefully this is beneficial for you. If you have questions, post them in the comments or send us a message. We're happy to help, happy to increase your awareness and live the millionaire life.